but thank you all for coming. As you probably know, I am a big fan of student learning outcomes, and I see that a lot of the faculty from Passaic are in the audience, so they could probably validate that. I think we're making some good progress. This is the second time that these groups have met, so you have some foundation, right? And so today, I think the aim of, or the objective of today is to really try to put some polish on what you already have and try to make sure that they're measurable. And we have brought along, or I've brought along, two tenured faculty from Passaic County Community College that are going to go over some important points in terms of how you identify and write good learning outcomes. So just one other thing, every once in a while on campus I hear from some of the more seasoned faculty, oh, this is just a fad. This is going to go away. This is just a fad. And I want to assure you that it's not a fad. And actually, if you keep up with what's going on in the student learning assessment arena, they just did a huge survey of provosts. I think they surveyed, over 700 provosts, and asked them how were the student learning outcomes projects going on in your campus. And the fact is that the majority of them did say that they were making progress, that faculty were using the assessment of student learning to improve student learning. And that's really why we're here, this is the beginning. We identify what the student learning outcomes are, and then we work to improve student learning. It's not about collecting piles and piles of data. It's about actually making a change, okay? And then students will learn better. That's what we want them to do. So with that, I don't want to take up any more time. I want to introduce two tenured faculty members from Passaic County College. The first is Anita Kamar. Professor Kamar is assistant professor in teacher education and early childhood, and along also the chairman of our assessment committee, and also Professor Christina Orienti, a newly minted tenured faculty in the math department. So I'll have them come forward. They're going to talk a little bit, and then you're going to work in your groups.
All right. So basically what we wanted to do today is to, we have outcomes here. So since we are going to walk the talk, we have what our effort is going to be is to help you do two things. We want to give you a brief presentation about what an SLO is and how we go about writing it, so that at the end of the presentation you're able to do two things. First and foremost, you're able to identify what a good SLO looks like, and then in your groups, when you start, when you maybe revisit your SLOs, or you kind of write them from scratch, you hopefully will use some of the specific bits of information. We're going to give you an SLO formula, and kind of give you a checklist to work with. Maybe that will help you kind of tweak and make your SLOs, your core learning SLOs, a little tighter. I do have to say that we've told you about all these different roles that we have, but we are here today primarily with our faculty hat on, because and you all can identify with this, because it's only as faculty who's right at the forefront of the teaching learning process along with the students that you have this unique window into the content, the core knowledge aspects, and what do you want the students to be able to do when you have finished a particular learning experience. And that is the most important window perspective to have when you're doing when you're creating your student learning outcomes. So we are looking at this from a faculty perspective, and that's the only perspective to look at it from. So.
Okay, so before we get into the particulars about what the outcomes look like, I guess the first question is, why have student learning outcomes? And I think this cartoon kind of gives a nice little introduction to that. The first guy says, I taught Stripe how to whistle. And the other one says, but I don't hear him whistling. So he replies, I said I taught him, I didn't say that he learned it. So this is probably something that we can all relate to in the classroom. So we go, we teach things, we hope that our students are learning what we think that we're teaching them, but what we really need to focus on is, are they learning what it is that we want them to learn? So we're kind of shifting that focus to not look at what we're teaching our students, but instead to look at what they're learning. Okay. So again, the focus on learning outcomes marks a shift from teaching to learning. So instead of asking ourselves, what am I going to teach today, we want to ask ourselves, what do I want my students to learn today? We're not looking at ourselves, how well do I teach? Instead, we want to look at how well did the students learn what it was that I set out to teach them. In an outcomes-based assessment model, the student's performance in terms of specific actions is the key point. So again, when we're looking at the outcomes we want to have for our students, we're not looking at what we're teaching, we're looking at the student's performance. How did they perform on specific actions that we asked them to do? Okay. So what are student learning outcomes, or SLOs for short? These are formal statements that articulate what students will be able to do upon the successful completion of a learning experience. So whether the end of a program, a course, which is the focus for today, a unit, or even down to a lesson. And again, it's what the student will be able to do, focus on the student learning.
All right. As faculty looking at student learning outcomes, it's extremely important to approach the task of articulating what our students will be able to do at the end of a learning experience when in the light of the whole the whole teaching learning process and what we call the instructional design. Because outcomes assessment or articulating outcomes is not something that you do, because your VP for academic affairs has asked you to do it, or because your state is doing it. It's a very integral part of the whole teaching learning design. As faculty, as content experts, specialists of our content, we all know the core knowledge content that that our courses need to teach. We know that this is the knowledge that we need to kind of instruct our students in. So we all know about our curriculum. We know about our curriculum, and we know what's the basic elements of knowledge that the students need to take away from the process. But we also are extremely aware of what we want the students to be able to do with that knowledge. So the whole dialogue about learning is really shifting towards what should the students be able to do with the knowledge that we're giving. So how should we look for signs that the students, indicators that the students are applying the knowledge and doing something with the core knowledge curriculum or the contents that we're giving them. And that's where assessment comes in. So we have our assessment tools that are built into the measurable outcome statements that help us kind of gather information about whether they are meeting the outcomes or not. So I just wanted to kind of put this out there for all of you to see that there's a very strong linkage between curriculum, about pedagogy, the specific learning methods, and we are all experts in curriculum, we are all experts in pedagogy because we've been doing this for 5 to 32 years, right? So we know the teaching learning mechanism that goes in, but it's extremely important for us to in continuing this dialogue and kind of continuing this work ahead, to think of outcomes as an essential part of the teaching learning process, because that's what's going to help us create outcomes that are meaningful to us, meaningful to the students' learning, meaningful to the course content, the core knowledge of the content, and the whole assessment process as such. So going straight into SLOs, we like to share the SMART rule, and this is something that Dr. Knivi introduced many years ago in our assessment committee. She said, make sure that you have student learning outcomes that are really SMART. And what do we mean by SMART? We mean that they need to be student-oriented. Again, the focus is on students' learning, not the instructor's teaching. They should be measurable. Your outcomes lead to your assessment, so you should be able to frame them in ways that make it easy for you to measure or gather data with them. They should be action-oriented in the sense that students are doing something in the way you've written the outcomes. So it's the student's action, the student's performance that it really needs to kind of catch on to. It should be relevant to your discipline. So you as your discipline experts and your content specialists know what students should be learning in your discipline. So you use that knowledge to write them. And then of course it should be time bound in the sense that these are specific things that students should be able to do by the end of a particular program, by the end of a course, by the end of a learning unit, or by the end of a whatever the duration of that learning experience is. We also like to quote Linda Susky. How many of you have heard of Linda Susky? Yeah, some of us have heard. So Linda Susky is the assessment guru, and she has given us these 4 big bullet points about student learning outcomes. You need to kind of frame them in such a way that they are not ambiguous. They don't use vague kind of words. They should be reasonably, there should be a balance between kind of keeping them too narrow and too broad. So you as faculty need to kind of come to a consensus about what's the middle ground to take. And again, most importantly, they should be very, very clearly measurable. And we're going to talk a little more about how to do that.
Okay, so what we want to do is give a little information about what student learning outcomes could look like. And we have kind of a little formula that can be followed in terms of writing your student learning outcome. So a student learning outcome really has 4 parts to it, and a lot of these we've mentioned before. So a time frame or condition, when will the action happen? At the end of a course, at the end of a program, at the end of a lesson. The student audience focus, so it's the students that will be performing that action for that outcome. An action verb, what is the action that they'll actually be performing? And we can use Bloom's taxonomy to talk a little bit more about that, which I'll have in a slide or two. And then finally, the student performance or the content that they've mastered, through doing that action. Okay. So one example of a student learning outcome, upon successful completion of the course, we have our time frame, the end of the course, the student will be able to compute statistical measures, for example. Okay. So again, we have that action verb, compute, and then we have the content that they're hoping to master through doing that. One more example. Upon successful completion of the course, the student will be able to apply the elements of art to critique a work of art, for example. Okay, so again, some type of a student performance that we're looking at the end of that outcome. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about that third piece of that formula, that action verb. Each student learning outcome should contain an action verb that clarifies the nature of student performance or states what the students will be able to do as a result of that learning experience. And there's a couple of important things to keep in mind when you're choosing your action verb, when you're formulating the student learning outcomes. First, we should only have one verb per student learning outcome. So each outcome should kind of list one thing that we're looking for the students to be able to do. And we can use Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive behavior to relate the SLOs that we're giving our students to the learning level that we're expecting of them. So Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive behavior is kind of a classification of learning objectives based on different levels of learning. So if you look across here, the level all the way to the left is considered to be the lowest level of learning, which is knowledge. So this is where a student would just remember or recognize information. And if you look underneath that, these are different action verbs that can be used in an SLO in order to measure that level of knowledge of the student. So if we're looking for knowledge, we might ask the student to cite something, label, list, enumerate, etc. And these are all examples of action verbs that could be, again, incorporated into those student learning outcomes for the different levels of learning. You can see as you go across, there's 6 levels, and they kind of go up into higher and higher levels of learning. So after knowledge would be comprehension, where they grasp the meaning behind the information and do some kind of interpretation of it, application, analysis, synthesis, and then the highest level of learning, according to Bloom's taxonomy, is evaluation, where a student would judge or evaluate information. And again, for each of these levels, there are different action verbs listed there, again, that we can use in those SLOs to link, which level it is that we're looking to measure for that student's learning, and use that to help us formulate those student learning outcomes.
Just to go back to the chart that you saw before here, these list of words list of verbs is extremely useful, because not just because it aligns itself to the levels of learning, it's also, these are very measurable words, and they are excellent to use in student learning outcomes, because they not only clarify what the student should be able to is doing, but also help you brainstorm and connect it to a possible assessment measure. So it also gives you a hint of what kind of tasks or assessment assignments could kind of be good to link to that, link to these action verbs. So here on this slide, we have, just 3 outcome statements, and we've kind of tried to bring examples from some of the disciplines that you guys will be working on. And on the right side, you see, on the left-hand side, you see outcomes that are probably kind of need a little bit of tightening, and on the left side, I'm really confused between my right and left now. So on the right side, you see, okay, on the left side, you see. Thank you.
I do this at the board all the time. Wait, which chair?
I had to drive for 1.5 hours to get here, so I'm just going to put it down to that. So on my left now? Okay. On the left, you see what we call bad or ugly outcomes. Not so bad or ugly, but then you as you go towards the right, we kind of try to tweak the action verb. So we gave you examples. So instead of saying, when you say students will learn to use the word processing, you are not really clarifying the action or the performance element to it. So instead, you're kind of being very, very specific by using the verb process information. So that's a little more measurable. When you say students will know about the patterns, and again ambiguous, it's a little vague. We don't know how they'll know. We don't know how they're going to demonstrate that they know. So when you say that you're going to ask them to communicate effectively through speech and writing, so again they are notice that they're neither too broad nor too specific, and you could make this a little more specific within your within your individual institutions if you wanted to. By saying that students will write a written report or something like that, but when we say communicate effectively, you kind of still leave the margin, a little bit of flexibility for faculty to kind of adapt it. But again, you are linking the outcome statement specifically to a verb which clarifies that the student has to do something in order to demonstrate the fact that they know it, instead of just saying that they will know. And then, of course, understand is the vaguest verb to use in a student learning outcome. So instead of saying students will understand the normal distribution, you're linking it to, again, like a student performance, and when you change it to students will solve problems using the normal distribution, so you know that you're going to make them solve, and they're going to show through their ability to solve problems that they understand the normal distribution. Okay. All right. So here we have given you like a 5-bullet checklist to evaluate SLOs. So this is something very simple that we put together based on all the stuff that we've been going on the last 10-15 minutes. So in order to assess or in order to evaluate if an outcome statement is clear, accessible, and an effective SLO, you should be able to give all these bullets a nice big check mark. So your first question to ask is, does it follow the structure of the SLO formula? So Christina just showed you the formula, so it has to have a time frame, it should have a student audience focus, it should clearly say student will be able to do, and it should have an action verb, and it should have a specific action or a student performance action or a content mastery related to that. It should only have one action verb, that's bullet number 2, and it should address student performance rather than content coverage by the student, by the instructor. So it's not the instructor that's being assessed, it's the student's learning that is being assessed. Can you observe the action? Can you see, is the product clearly something that can be demonstrated, that can be observed directly, and can be measured? Is that something that can be that can potentially become an assessment, can be rated, can be graded, can be used to give feedback to the student about, how well are you doing that? So that's the checklist. So now what we wanted to do is to show you a bunch of SLOs and have you practice using the checklist on your own and see, if you can assess and judge for yourself if this particular outcome statement that you see, the SLO outcome statement, how good is it? So remember, once again, in order to give it like the real green signal, you should be able to check all the bullets. So all 5 bullets need to be given a resounding yes to. All right, so let's look at the very first one. Upon the successful completion of the course, students will be exposed to case studies documenting the use of ethical reasoning in daily decisions. What do you think?
So let's kind of go down the list, I guess, and see what we can check off here. So first thing, does the SLO statement follow the formula, the structure of that formula?
It does.
No?
Yeah. So upon the successful completion of the course,
So we have the time frame.
students will be, then you have exposed is a verb. How good is a verb? That's your call. All right. Is there a student performance linked to this? Case studies documenting the use of, now you see we kind of threw in all that garbage just to throw you off, right? You get that. Okay, so would you be able to check the first box, you think? Does the SLO follow the structure of the SLO formula?
No.
No?
No.
Formula, the content is.
I think the formula is there in terms of just having those four pieces. There's a time
It's just
frame. It says the students are doing something. There is a verb, and I think that's where the issue is coming up because we're going to, it's probably not a great verb, but there is a verb there, and there is some type of, a content or mastery that we're looking at the end of it.
There is no content mastery, but there is a reference to a content.
But student is not going to
That's
Okay,
right.
and that's exactly the issue with this SLO. So there is a verb there, but the verb is not saying what the student is going to be doing. It's saying that the student will be exposed to something.
That's right.
It has to be a verb or action verb. Something like action verb.
Yeah, but who's doing the action? It's the teacher who's doing the action.
The teacher's exposing them, so I guess
Right, it's not ideal. Absolutely correct. So you would kind of give the first one like a weak check because it's at least for sticking to the formula, not in the way it is intended to, but it has all those parts to it. Does it contain only one action verb? There is no action verb for the student.
for the students.
Absolutely. Does the SLO address student performance rather than content coverage?
No.
No.
Yeah, and this is the definite no
Yeah,
here.
so that's like a definite no. Is the specified action observable?
No.
Well, somebody can see the teacher exposing the students, but it's it's all wrong in the sense it's the teacher who's exposing it, and that really doesn't cut the criteria for the. So can the specified action be measured?
No.
No. So that kind of makes it so we kind of gave one like a very weak yes, but rest of it is a no. Let's look at the next one. Upon the successful completion of the course, the students will be able to apply ethical reasoning in daily decisions.
So maybe we'll try to go down the list again. So does it follow the structure of the formula?
Yes.
Yeah, that I would say it does. Does it contain only one action verb?
Yes.
Yep, we have that word apply. Okay, so they'll be able to apply. Does it address student performance rather than instructor performance?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Is the specified action observable?
No. No. How do I?
It's observable, but it's not quantifiable.
It's not measured.
Okay, yeah. So maybe it's kind of observable. We can see what the students are kind of doing in their daily lives, but that's going to be a very difficult thing to measure. Or, are they applying ethical reasoning in daily decisions that they're making? I can't think of an assignment or something that we're going to be able to see. Are they doing this in their daily decisions? So.
And at best, this would be like an indirect assessment. It would be, their perception, oh yes, I am. And, and there's nothing wrong with indirect assessment. Indirect assessment is used, but when we are talking about assessment of student learning, we do want direct assessment. So we do want a direct a possibility to be able to measure that the students are able to do it. So that still kind of makes it like a weak SLO because it's not observable. And it's therefore not quantifiable and measurable.
Okay. Okay, next one. Upon the successful completion of the course, students will be able to appreciate and understand the value of ethical reasoning in their daily decisions. Okay. We're gonna jump into the. Yeah, so I'll kind of go through the first quickly. This does follow the formula. We can see those 4 elements of it, and this is going to be the issue, which I heard a few people say already. Does it contain only one action verb? No, we have 2 in there. We have appreciate and understand. Okay. Each SLO should just be measuring one thing at a time. You want to use one action verb per SLO. Does it address student performance rather than content covered by the instructor?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say so. Okay. Is it observable?
No.
Yeah, and these are going to be difficult things again to observe and measure. How do we know that they've appreciated the value of something? And again, that word understand, we talked about being very vague. How do we know they understand something? We should be using an action verb instead so that they can show us that level of understanding. Okay. And we'll do one more here. Upon the successful completion of the course, students will be able to apply ethical reasoning in discussing an ethical issue.
Oh, we heard a resounding yay. Do we have a winner here?
Yes.
We do? Yes? All right, so we won't even belabor this.
We won't even go through the whole checklist,
Right.
yeah.
So let's ask you, what is it about this one that had you all going yay? So you instantly read it and it kind of,
It was all the 4 parts. It has only one verb.
Right.
Observable, and it's been measured.
Can you look at this outcome and kind of maybe also brainstorm an assignment that could go with this? What kind of assignment do you think you could make them do with this? Right? A case study is an excellent assignment, a case study analysis. It could also be a case study analysis done in a written report. It could be an oral discussion. It could be a presentation. It could be a group project. A debate. This is typically what a good outcome needs to do, is that if it's written clearly and in a measurable and observable fashion, it kind of paves the way for you to link an assessment to it, which is where eventually we all kind of need to get. So an assignment, a measure, or a means kind of is very clearly in sight when you word a student learning outcome well. So that's the thing too. So job well done, guys. So just to kind of wrap up quickly, and we realize that you all worked on your outcome statements, and some of this stuff may already be you will be well versed with this. But when you are writing SLOs and core SLOs like you are, it's important to identify the most important things that you want the students. Again, it all starts with the core knowledge, which I know you've already done. You've had discussions getting to this point, and make sure that the outcomes are achievable, accessible, and observable when you write. And so it's always good to think of a potential assessment when you're writing the SLO statement, or have it like at the back of your mind, because that kind of helps you state your student learning outcome in a more clearer and an accessible fashion. Avoid vague verbs, so know, appreciate, understand, become familiar with are not the verbs to use. The other three are extremely important. It's good for us to be mindful of using action verbs that are related to the learning level. So we should make an attempt to make sure that the verb that we are using aligns to the cognitive level or the thinking level that the task demands. And by that same measure, it should be appropriate to the task. So if you're asking them to explain, if your student learning outcome is explain elements of art, you cannot give them a multiple choice quiz to kind of that cannot be the assessment that links that asks them to explain it. So an explain needs to be a written paper or a short essay question. So what would be a verb that best fits a multiple choice quiz or a test or something like that? identify. So this is one of the most common things that we see in student learning outcomes, that the outcome statement verb is not a good fit for the assessment, and that kind of needs to kind of then be tweaked a little. And because these student learning outcomes are student oriented and have to be shared with students, it's extremely important that they're written in a language that students understand. Either when you're presenting the syllabus or when you're talking about the course requirements, we've found it extremely helpful if we take the time to kind of explain these student learning outcomes a little, so that they understand what it is that they're going to be required to do, and how that kind of determines the parameters of their learning in this course as it relates to the course content.